right.
Yes. And now she's
I'm going to call this meeting of the Tipp City Exempted Village Schools meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Fox, if you could take attendance, please.
Amber Drum,
here.
Rick Maines,
Present.
Simon Patry,
Here.
and Zakor.
Present.
Mrs. Dunaway is absent this evening. We do have a quorum. We can begin the meeting.
Thank you. First item is, the only item is the Garmin Miller OFCC presentation. I'll turn over to Mr. Stefanik to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. We are privileged tonight. My hall's got stuck, so we're privileged to have representatives from Garmin Miller Architects firm here this evening, and their primary goal is to give us information about OFCC so that we have a better understanding of that whole process, and we can all be on the same page as we move forward with our master planning and our facilities projects. So I'll turn it over to Eric, Monica.
All right, great, thank you. We're getting our presentation up here. We're happy to be here and hope we can explain it away for you. So we're going to talk this evening about the Ohio Facility Construction Commission and the expedited local partnership process. There's lots of acronyms. Certainly, if you have any questions and need some explanations, just let us know. Would you like me to come over there to work it? All right. So on our agenda, we're going to talk about the history of OFCC and the programs. We're going to talk through how the districts are prioritized through the equity ranking, talk through the master planning process, and talk at length about the ELP guidelines and the overview of the guideline process. So the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission oversees all the capital projects in the state. Primarily, they focus on, what we're going to focus on is the school construction piece, the K-12 renovation and construction piece. They certainly really, to generalize, they do all horizontal or vertical construction, and the my department of ODOT does the vertical construction, horizontal construction. Buildings, roads, vertical, OFCC. So let's talk about K-12. The programs that we're going to just talk through that might be specific to you would be the Classroom Facilities Assistance Program, which we have the acronym of CFAP, C-F-A-P. It is where the state contributes towards the master plan of solution of a district. And that's the funded program. That's really what every district wants to be, because they get the money from the state for their program. They get in a percentage. If you're not yet eligible for CFAP, then you might be interested in the expedited local partnership program, ELP. So I think of that L as the local piece, where you have to come up with local money to pursue and to complete a portion of your master plan. There's another program, vocational funded assistance program, that's the the V, and that's for vocational school districts, not for you, but it's very similar just to the classroom piece. So we're going to talk a little bit about that equity rank list as I referenced. There's 609 school districts in the state. They are ranked on a yearly basis by the Ohio Department of Education. Every September, this list comes out. And they, OFCC works through that list back in 1997 or 2000, back when they started at the lowest number and worked through the list. It's based on the district valuation of the property divided by this number of students. And so it's number of dollars per students. And so that's ranked every year, and it determines your position of when you would get funding, as well as the amount of money, your local and state share percentage. So for Tipp City, go to the next page, you'll see that you are in position number 349 out of the 609, and that's 58% local, 42% state. And I looked back for several years, and you can see that you go as high as 65% back in 2019. And so it's getting, kind of a little bit better in your position because you certainly want the state to pick up as much as possible. So that's kind of where you're ranking out to be. So the local ELP, the Expedited Local Partnership Program, in order to qualify for that, you need to be at least 2 years away from that funded program. They don't really want to see an overlap of programs for a couple of reasons, policy reasons, and but they will want to be outside of that window. The district would develop a district-wide master plan solution in this case. So that's the same step as in CFAP. But then the district says, hey, can't do the whole piece. We have this need. We can't do this whole master plan. We want to do a piece that's, a discrete portion. So maybe an elementary piece or a middle school piece or whatever that might be. So you would spend local money to complete that project. And then the money that is spent is what we would call is a credit towards the local share when you become eligible for CFAP. So I have a very basic math equation at the end to wrap this all together so we'll get there. So the ELP has 4 phases. There's this eligibility and application, pretty easy. It's done online. The facility assessment and master planning piece that's the gathering of information. Phase 3 is really the formality with OFCC, the agreement that takes place, the funding, and then phase 4 is really the project itself. So we're going to talk through some of that information. A lot of this information really comes from the OFCC website, and then you can download the guidelines and the application. But we're just talking a little bit about the highlights. So again, you got to be outside 2 years of CFAP. There's a board resolution that indicates that you want to participate in ELP, and you identify the approximate date that you believe that you will secure your local share. And then there's an application that also includes that same information. Certainly things change. If you don't go to the voters, you change your mind, there's really no harm, no foul. But it just gets that intention rolling that with OFCC that, hey, the board is interested, let's move forward. Let's start expending state money for some of these assessments and enrollment that takes place. The next slide talks about the facilities assessment and master planning. So once you apply, OFCC says, yep, you're right, you're outside of that 2-year window. We are going to move forward with gathering that information. So the master plan, as we keep talking about, really it has 3 components. One is what is going on in the district as far as the buildings. How are the buildings, what are their conditions like? What needs to be done to bring them up to the standards of the design manual? The second piece is the students that go into that. You want to make sure they have a calculation that determines really the optimum number of students. It's all based on calculation, but how many students fit into this building before an addition is needed. And then reprogramming looks at the size, mostly of the core spaces. So cafeteria, kitchen, gym, media center, things need to be resized for that population. There may be a budget that goes into the master plan to move some walls to make those spaces. If you click again, you go through it. There's a couple here. So we talk about that. The facility assessment, the foundation, enrollment projection is looked at 10 years. It's a 10-year look ahead. If your enrollment is increasing, then the master plan number is that 10th year because they want to make sure they capture the highest enrollment possible so that your building is sized and you don't have to make adjustments later. If your enrollment is declining, they're going to use the 5th year instead of going all the way out to that lowest year. Hopefully that maybe you'll steady off a little bit when you're doing the master plan. And so reprogramming, I mentioned that to correct some building sizes. You can click through to the, thank you. So for your district specifically, we walked through the buildings 2 days on November 22nd and 23rd to validate some of the assessments that were already produced for your district. Our information should be updated shortly, but it's an important piece to make sure that that foundation, that scope that is identified and what needs to be done is accurate. We know that once you would apply to OFCC and say you want to move forward with that generates that enrollment piece. Your enrollment projections would be produced. They have a consultant, Future Think is who they use, and Tracy would update that enrollment piece. And then they plug that information to make this master plan. And so there's, it's always really small. You bring out your cheaters and you have to read all the information on there. But what's interesting that can certainly be done, and we confirmed it with them recently, is that OFCC would produce a base master plan, and that's really based on the numbers. They're going to say, what is the most economical solution for this district? They don't know you, they don't know all your needs, your priorities, but they would look at it on paper and say, boom, this is what this district should use. And then after meeting with them through a kickoff meeting and through some other communications, you can say, you know what, we think that, and we believe that this is a better solution. And through some discussion, they often can agree and say, you know what, that's fine if you choose to do that. That's your preferred plan. But we're gonna stick with this base plan. This is how much we'd contribute towards it. If you do your plan that you want, we're only going to contribute this, piece, this amount. We're going to cap our contribution. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds because if you get what you want, but you also get that state money and that state commitment. So there is some dialogue that needs to take place with that, but it is a good opportunity for the district. Phase 3 goes into that project agreement. I mentioned it's really more of a formality where the district and OFCC enter into an agreement. And that's where they go, this is your plan, and it's based on these assessments, and it's based on this enrollment report. And so this is going to identify how much the state would potentially or have as a maximum amount of credit that they would give towards the project. So it locks in your master plan for a year. It locks in your percentage while you go out to your voters to secure your local share. One thing I didn't mention too is by participating in ELP, that locks in your local share for when you are eligible for CFAP. So, we saw that you were at 65 and you went down to 58%. Who knows? I mean, are you at the bottom? Maybe you're going to go back up to 65 in 5 years. And so if you've locked in at 58 in 5 years, when you're up for funded, you're not paying the 65. You're only paying the 58 because you did an ELP project. So that's a benefit to some districts. So discrete portion is really, again, that what you intend to pursue and complete as part of your ELP project. So again, district-wide is, the big fancy solution, but you can't afford it all. So you're going to just do a piece of it. Your biggest need oftentimes is what you're going to do in ELP. The funding, there's a funding plan that treasurer needs to complete, which identifies how you're raising that money through a bond, through, bake sale, whatever that is. And I let you know, so we've got some good cooks in the town, maybe, I don't know. And then as well as some locally funded initiatives, and we haven't talked about that, because really in ALP, all of it is local money, but when you're talking and working with the state plan, they look at the creditable amount, which is what they will contribute their, establish their contribution based on, and then locally funded things are things that are above and beyond. So additional square footage than what's in the master plan, maybe a type of finish that would be outside of the norm. Bus garage, obviously, auditorium, natatorium, those kinds of things. So that's something else that too, as a treasurer, you would say, we're going to come up with our money for the plan, the creditable piece, but also here's how we're paying for the LFI piece. So, and then the half bill maintenance is a requirement for state for projects that are state assisted. Oftentimes, though, it's a half mil based on for a 23-year period, but oftentimes the ALP district will delay that until CFAP, because that clock really doesn't start ticking for you to be showing that you have that money to maintain the buildings until CFAP. And so, if it's 5 years down the road, then you're really having to collect for 28 years. And so most districts delay that requirement. And then we move into, the project itself. There's design that must follow the design manual. It's, a couple thousand pages that show a lot of variety of, systems and equipment and on how to, put a building together. And then there's 4 phases of design, and it's reviewed by the school board. There's a third party that comes in with OFCC that looks to make sure that you're following the rules. Everyone signs off on it. The contracts are developed by the commission. Again, they want to, they're hands off in who you select. They're hands off in really everything, but they still want to make sure you're following the rules. At the end of the day, if they're going to put money back into a district for how you've built and designed the building, they still want to make sure you're doing it properly and following those rules. So all the bidding and design and contract, all that's done, handled by the district. There are some reporting requirements. So like on a quarterly basis, the team would get together with the treasurer, sometimes the superintendent with OFCC, the architect and the construction manager, and talk through and say, hey, this is, here are our contracts, and here's what were the pay applications, and here's what we've paid out, and here are the big change orders, and just kind of talk through some things. So it's a nice, I've done that many times on the other side, working with districts to make sure that everybody's keeping the same financial piece, because it can be overwhelming. But you want to make sure that at the end of the day, all of the money is in the right column, whether it's creditable column or LFI column. So that's a nice piece. And then there's a closeout process where you get a binder and it identifies all of the amount of work and the scope that takes place. Any kind of ALP project that takes place that's not part of your master plan. At the end of the day or in CFAP, you don't get credit for. So let's say if you were going to, as part of your discrete portion, I don't even know, put it in what?
Football stadium.
Oh, well, I'm just saying, like, let's say if you were gonna put an addition onto, or let's say you're gonna put an addition onto a building. And then you're like, well, we're not gonna use that building anymore for educating our kids. So we're going to go over here because our enrollment changed or something. Well, then that addition would not count. You really need whatever you need to get credit for, whatever you're going to use in the master plan in CFAP needs to. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
I'm trying to say it, but I can't.
Yeah, whatever work you do, it has to be part of the long-term.
Yes, there you go. It has to be long-term. So any work not executed under ALP that is abandoned or replaced in CFAP will not be credited. So always a great idea. You're going to put a ceiling tile in, but you're not putting fire suppression in. So then in CFAP, well, we're going to take the ceiling tile down because we need to put fire suppression in. You're not going to get credit on the ceiling tile that you put in and out. That makes any sense. You don't want to pay for things twice, for sure. So, and then So getting into the eventual participation in the classroom facilities assistance program. So when ELP district becomes eligible, your master plan is updated again. You know, some time has gone on, your enrollment may have changed, certainly costs will have changed. So those things get updated and things are recalculated. And it includes the qualifying ELP expenses, and the local share is determined based on that number during that recalculation period. Any ELP credit that is deducted from the required share to determine the district's CFAP portion. So at the end of, when you get into CFAP, there's a chance that, wow, we, had enough ELP credit so that we don't need to raise any more money. And all we're going to do now is finish off this one building because we built 2 other ones. Or we only built 1 building, we now need to build 2. We now need to raise a little bit more to finish this off. So you really want to understand and have the right communication to your voters, because some voters will say, oh, I thought, why are you coming to us again 5 years later? So that's a piece where we can help make sure that that's, or talk about the right scope to make sure that that doesn't happen for you. And then here's my example, and then we're done. So I'm going to use some really round numbers. It's on the $10 million number. So in our first column at the top, we have and it's 2023, we have a project, a master plan that is $10 million. And 58% of that is 5.8 million. So that's what you would have if you were in CFAP, but you're not in CFAP. But you say, I'm going to do project A, this ELP project of $8 million. Doesn't matter what it is. So you go out and you raise $8 million. You do your project, everything's great. A few years later, you say, okay, it's 2026. I've added some 32% inflation, which is super high, but whatever, I did, that's what I did. So your $10 million is 13.2 was what it would be. But so now under this column that says 2026, your master plan costs, which is, if you had a $10 million project and you did 8 million, then you have 2 million left, right? So 2 million plus this 32%, plus the 8 million of what you did already, because you add in your ELP credit, gives you this $10,640,000. Does everybody follow that math? You say, okay, that this is what OFC says, they recalculate the master plan, what needs to be done, plus your ELP credit. Then you take 58% of that, and that's $6,171,200. And OFC would say, okay, well, now you're in CFAP to do this district-wide plan, that's what you need to raise. And you'd be like, great, we already spent $8 million on in our project A. And they'd be like, great, then you don't need to raise any more money. You would get $1,828,800 back as an overpayment. So in that case, you did the majority of the work up front, and then you got some money back. And you're following this. Okay, I get it. Okay. The other example down below, similar case, $10 million project, 5.8 million. You haven't, you're not called for that yet. So you're like, oh, project B, we're doing $5 million. Okay, so you raise $5 million now. In 2026, 5 million is left because you only did half of it. 5 million times 32% plus your 5 million that you've already spent on project B. It's totals 11.6 million. Yeah, $11,600,000. 58% of that is $6.7 million. That's what OFC would say. Okay, that's what you need to raise. And you're like, oh, well, we've already, have a credit of $5 million. And they'd say, great. Now you only need to raise $1,728,000 more. So in that case, you do need to come up with a little bit more money. So that's typically how the two options kind of play out. except that, projects are more than $10 million.
Well, and I just want to say something for the good of the group.
Sure.
My mind works differently than your examples.
Okay.
In your examples, you kind of hung around that 58%, number, that's what, the local share was going to be, and 42% would come back from, when we're talking about facilities and needs of the district, I want to come as close to putting a bond out there that attacks 100%, of the projects that we need to accomplish rather than 58%.
Okay, well,
Yeah, that's where my mindset is, and then we would automatically
get money back.
get money back from
Sure.
OFCC when our number is its turn.
That would be great. I would say that most districts are not able to tackle that big elephant. They have to take it as a little bite of, a
Right.
piece of it. So
But I guess I would say, like, I would hope our focus would be
the
there
bigger one.
and then work our
Yes.
way back as the numbers go, like, that's too much
But
to ask right
But
now.
what I want to explain though too is if inflation was higher than 30, or is your call for CFAP later, there's that chance that inflation is going to make it smaller and smaller and smaller, and you're going to get, so you really want to just, I don't want to say bite off more, but then you should, but you want to just understand the risk that's involved.
And that 32% inflation is probably, in today's world, it's probably low. That's over what, 3 years? Did you go? So last year it was
17%.
17%. That was the increase last year.
And it's got to slow down some.
It will. It will. I guess the other factor that comes in with that inflation number is that the credit you earn, you completed your project, you get credit for it. Then you've got a couple of years to go and then you get funded. Well, the funded number inflates, but your credit does not. In other words, when you finish your project, your credit is established, that locks in.
Right, right, I have it under no inflation factor, right? And then too, if you had a big significant drop in enrollment, that could change as well because they recalculate the number. I've been at districts where they were gonna have 2 buildings, they built 1, did their enrollment, wow, we'll just add an addition over here. We were able to get it to work, but you have to be careful of, the message that goes out as well.
I think under the old program, it's just always wise to think that we're going to get 2 master plans.
Mhm.
Yeah, and most of the time the scope stays the same, but your enrollment is the driver there. So if it goes up, it goes down, that's going to change that. If that stays consistent, the only change you'll have between the 2 master plans is an inflationary cost increase. It's pretty simple.
I have a few questions. They're all kind of tied together, but given what you know about our district so far, which of the programs or combination of the programs provide the most funding for our school district? The HELP or the CFAP, a combination of both?
Well, CFAP is really what most districts would want to be in because they're getting money right away from the state. The state is going to contribute and commit to that. HELP, all the money is coming from you up front. And so that's why it's a little bit harder to sell to your community because people will say, well, when are we going to get our money? And we've heard that for years ago. We're never going to be getting that state money. Why should we have to pay for it all ourselves up front? So that's why when you apply and send in the board resolution, OFCC looks at it, looks at their private list of priority of funding. They don't share that, who's all next in line. You are, because you're at 349, you're making your way up there to that, funded position where you'd be eligible for that program. If they accept your application, that means you're more than 2 years away, so that you're not even eligible for CFAP. You know, it's not your choice, it's them telling you. If they deny it and say, no, you're close, then it's like, okay, well, this is good, we're close. Then you still would want to be working on planning, when can you get there? You're still gonna have, you know, a little bit of waiting because they haven't started that. They try to work with districts and give them 18 months to plan. So, you know, if you're able to do ELP and you have a need and you have momentum and you have, you know, a community behind you, then that's a good thing.
But my follow-up to that then ties right into what you're saying is, how and when do we find out if we're eligible for the CFAP?
So we can reach out to, or we have reached out to the OFCC planner, which is Valerie Montoya and Tyler Palmer. Tyler's relatively new, so they've been working together. And we talked to them and they said, and they're not the ones that have make the final call, but they said you're getting close to CFAP. So most districts, when the district says, hey, OFCC, where are we? They're like, well, if you're not in our planning little circle or inner ring, you're 5 to 8 years away. You know, there's some districts that tell 8 to 10. I mean, just because of, you know, they're funding maybe, I don't know, 5 to 8 districts a year, it seems. And there's about 170 to 100 districts that are just kind of waiting on this list. So, so she pretty much said, you know, Valerie said, yeah, if the district submits their ELP application this year, most likely I could see us accepting it and moving forward, having them pursue ELP. But if they wait, you know, a year or two, chances are they're going to be in CFAP. But
There's no guarantee.
but there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
And again, she's not the one that has the list. It's really more the director.
So then I guess that confused me a little bit. Then should we apply for the CFAP?
You don't
first?
apply for that.
Oh,
So what you need to
okay.
do, in my opinion, is you apply for ELP.
Okay.
And that way, that
Yes.
you are forcing OFC's hand to say,
Okay.
Tipp City, where are they? Yep, get them in ELP.
All
That
right.
means you're more than 2 years away. Do the planning that you need to do what you need to do. And if something changes, there are ways to, you know, transition into the other program.
Okay.
It's not gonna hurt you. It's not, if you're in it, if you're in ELP, they're not gonna go, oh, they're busy with ELP. Let's move to the next district. They're not gonna do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So really the best bet, or the most appropriate program is the expedited program, the CFAP. And because ELP was really, the original program was CFAP, the funded program. There was nothing else. And there were so many districts back in the day, this is back in the year 2000. There were so many districts that were upset because they had to wait 10, 15 years. I mean, it was a long time before they were going to get funded. And so they approached the state and said, so what are you going to do for us? You know, what we have needs now. And so the expedited program, the ELP program, was formed that allowed districts to go forward and using their money to get something they needed to get done while they waited for the funded program to catch up.
Okay.
And so it gets confusing when you say, well, you know, are we close? Are we not close? You know, this 2-year piece that's in there is embedded in law.
Okay.
So if you're within 2 years, they won't allow you to do it now. They're going to make you wait until you get the funded program because it overlaps the programs. There's no information.
And it seems like the timing, you know, could be really ideal for your district if you were to apply for ELP, work on ELP, be in design, even be in construction, and then say, hey, we're going to fund your district. Well, either you get the money back because you've fully funded it yourself, or great, let's finish the rest of our district at the state's dime, you know. So it kind of gets everybody wrapped up around the same time instead of having to wait. I mean, that's, again, we're working with some districts that are in the 500s who, you know, like, they're not gonna get their money for quite some time, and so they're not really in a hurry, and they're plodding along, and, you know, but districts that are, you know, you're, again, 349 is a good spot to be in, so.
You know, a couple other things too is that, you know, you think we talked about inflation. You know, you go forward under the expedited program, you have a need now, you're paying for it. Not necessarily today's dollars, because you still have, you know,
Right.
almost a year of design and then 2 years of construction, so you're kind of going down the road. But in that time frame, you can complete that project under L. And hopefully you're very close or on the cusp then of the state coming in right behind the expedited program. And then you complete the district-wide fix. So. Are you in a good spot? I think so. I really do. But you're probably not going to have a very large gap between the OAK program and the CFAP program. That should be really.
Thank you.
Yes.
A lot to process. Is my thinking correct that you're in the ELP program with the hope and anticipation of the CFAP, that CFAP really only happens if in fact the state is in agreement with what it is you're doing? In other words, if you have an old building and they see it, you know, renovation to new, like 98%,
Right.
and you say, well, we don't care, we want to renovate that building. So they don't, is my thinking correct that if that's a local decision to do that and that's not in agreement with the OFCC, it's probably a reasonable expectation that you're not going to get state credit for that?
I think, first of all, under the expedited program, if you start in that, go through that planning process, you're going to arrive at an agreed between district and state, an agreed master plan.
Okay.
Now, you remember what Monica showed on there, there's a base plan and there's a preferred plan. If the district chooses to do something under a preferred plan, it's going to state in that
Master plan.
in that master plan, you know, we're going to fund this much.
I think I got it.
Yeah.
And then based on that agreement, the calculations unfold accordingly to what? Okay. Second question, is there a program like an AVAP?
AVAP?
AFAP,
AFAP,
yes.
what is AFAP? And I'm surprised you don't have it up here.
Well, I didn't, there's other programs as well.
Yes, but it is an option.
It is, but right, it's for a district that's in the funded position, so they have gotten the phone call to be funded. And a master plan is developed, and I can't remember what the percentage is, 10%, 1%, I'll have to look and see. But there's a minimal amount of money that the state would attribute towards your district, and then they pretty much walk away.
And in that process, if I understand correctly, that agreement, so to speak, even though it's a limited amount, it's also a maximum amount of independent decision-making by that district. Am I pretty much summarizing that correctly?
I think there is
So it's sort of a trade-off. Do you
Do you
value
want money or do you want power?
or do you want autonomy? Exactly.
And probably that would be the 32% difference in state funding at this point, right? We'd have the tax burden to the taxpayer. It's a $100 million project.
Right.
Is a $32 million difference because they would only give you 10 out of the 42 million.
$100 million project?
I'm just saying for
It's
easy
a
math.
number,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
I would, to be honest, I think there's maybe one district in the state that does, and I don't even know where it is, but it's not a very and I don't want to say not popular, but and maybe as the equity, OFCC moves up the chain, where they're in like the 500s, but you need to be up for the CFAP position, or, you know, up to the funded program, and you're not in the funded program, so. It's certainly something that you can, if you're, when you get that call, that would be look at the master plan and look at the numbers and then look at what that percentage is, and then you could weigh out, you know, whether you want the autonomy or the money, so.
Yeah, if you have to wait until CFAP to even get into that program, then, you know, to your point. So you're leaving 32%, why would you, I mean, you're there at the front of the program.
Yeah.
You jump on it and say, yeah, fix my entire district and let's go. Get the full amount. That makes sense.
Well, I agree with it philosophically, but logistically, I disagree because you're going with the assumption that that's going to pass with the voters. And so that's a big assumption based on what the sentiment is of that community and what they are on board with what plan. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So there is an assumptive factor that you must consider in order to get that 32.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of factors that come into that. Financially, you're looking at the amount of millage that would be required to do a district-wide fix, even with a million or two coming into you, versus the millage factor when you have a fuller state share. So, but I do get that. There's more to consider.
Yeah.
You know, usually when you start getting to that point, and we're not that far away from getting a lot of that information, but we're starting out with the basics and we're working our way up with the state and making sure that we have a plan, working that same avenue with you as a district to say, what do you need? What's your preferred plan? And then we're going to compare those master plans and make sure you have something. And in doing that, there's a lot of spreadsheet calculations that are going to be taking place. You know, what's the millage? What's the cost? What's the benefit of doing something now versus waiting another 2 or 3 years? Under the expedited program, maybe you want to do a larger piece. Doing it all probably is a pretty large hit from a millage standpoint, I would guess. But there's a lot of factors that we will have to go through with you so that everything's on the table at that point, so that everybody can make a good decision.
Okay.
Yeah, those are great questions.
That was my last slide too, right? Is that the last one? It goes to like nothing. You have questions? There you go. Yeah, there you go. Here's my last slide. Anything else?
There's another program, by the way, that's called the ENP, Exceptional Needs, which you probably wouldn't qualify for that. That's when districts have a particular building with, I'll try to give you an example. What was the district we worked with that was outside Toledo at the airport? Toledo Airport. What is it?
Sylvania.
It wasn't Sylvania, it's a smaller one. Well, anyway, they had an elementary school that ended up was near the end of one of the runways. And in the mornings, when flights were getting ready to take off, the jets would come down and they'd be in the taxi formation and they would sit out there in the taxiway with their engines running. And of course, then take off. And all of those fumes would fill that elementary school.
Oh my gosh.
And it was early morning flights, you know, and so maintenance staff was going in trying to air out this building there, and they applied. That was an exceptional need.
Oh, okay.
That's something that's devastatingly wrong with a building, you know, to get into that program. But it is also part of that CFAP.
So more of an environmental exceptional
It is,
need versus
yes,
a students. I thought you meant exceptional needs students. But
No.
okay.
Well, there's also growth too, exceptional needs too. If you're growing so high.
Yes.
So quickly,
Exploding.
yeah. So it's an application-based program that they look at once a year and then they rank the districts and then they pick off the 1 or 2 that they do. So that's also not a guarantee to get into that.
I was just trying to confuse Rick because he was asking, you know, what's the best way to go for CFAP? Now you've got all these others.
And who knows down the road too, because there's other, you know, high equity districts that are like, well, what about us? Give us $1 million and we'll go away for good, or what, you know, I don't know what the plan is. I mean, wasn't the OFCC was supposed to be running for 12 years, like, you know, until 2012 or something, and then it's still around and, there's still, Columbus isn't done yet as a district and, other districts have their needs and some districts are done for 20 years and now they're having other needs. They want to get back in and they're not, it's not a revolving door. You've been through the program, stay away. So you just don't know what's going to happen. Different governor, different, legislation, money. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, so.
I think a lot of that changed when the original tobacco suit money was available to the state, which actually was available for the original state OSFC, Ohio School Facilities Commission, which changed the OFCC. And that tobacco suit money was dedicated for that educational piece. And so there was a consistent amount of money that came in on an annual or semi-annual, biannual basis. And then that changed back in 2007, 8, somewhere around there, I think, when there was an agreement and the state took all of the money, tobacco suit money at one month. And then they had this pot of money that they kept dumping out to different organizations. And so that was, in my estimation, that was part of the decline. It was nice having that money come in on a regular basis and it was dedicated. Eventually that's gone. So now everything is based on bonds. Interesting. And I delayed a lot of. I had so much money, particularly year.
Make it the opioid money?
I'm sorry.
To make it the opioid
No.
money?
And I know.
Lawsuits. But it-
A lot more.
Any other questions? With that, I entertain the motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
Second.
Last is going to roll.
Ames,
Yes.
Drum, yes. Patry,
Yes,
Zakor.
Yes.
motion passes. Our next meeting will be Monday, the 12th.
December 12th.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. This is very informative.
Thank you guys.